Good morning, and welcome to the online Sunday service of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Urbana-Champaign. I am Reverend Florence Caplow, the lead minister of this church, coming to you live this morning from our beautiful, empty sanctuary. If you'd like to follow along with the order of service, you can find it below your video on YouTube, or you can go to our live stream page or the page about this service to download the order of service. Today's service is very special. Each year here at UUCUC, we have a service auction. There's one coming up in April. And there is an opportunity at that auction to bid on the privilege of choosing a service topic during the church year. During last year's auction, Kathleen Robbins won the winning bid for this opportunity, and she has asked me to speak on the continuing costs of inequality. Well, Kathleen, this is a thorny topic. It is so huge and so, frankly, dispiriting. And I am also aware that we have a lot of economists in this congregation, and I get kind of nervous when I stray from the topics that I know well, like poetry and religion, into the realm of economics, which feels like a foreign country to me. Luckily for me, one of those economists, our own Walt McMahon, has spent a lifetime studying and researching inequality and how it relates to our educational systems. And he was kind enough to talk with me and also to share the script from a sermon that he gave during one of our summer services nearly 4 years ago on this topic. So thank you. Special thanks to both Kathleen Robbins and Walt McMahon. The thing is, growing inequality, and it is growing by leaps and bounds, affects almost every aspect of our lives. The economy, of course, but also racial justice, workers' rights, environmental justice, education, immigration, policing, the collapse of rural America, and on and on. I hope by the end of this service, you will both be reminded of why this matters for each and every one of us, how it relates to being Unitarian Universalist, and that you'll find a little bit of inspiration around the things that each of us can actually do to make a difference. As part of our ongoing commitments to social justice, each Sunday we begin our services with a land acknowledgement of the native peoples whose land it is here where we gather and wherever you may be listening. So I invite you to bring to mind those peoples as I say these words, and then we'll have a moment of silence afterwards. We recognize and acknowledge that we gather today on Indigenous land, taken through deception, coercion, and violence. We acknowledge the continued displacement and oppression of Native peoples and honor their commitments to survival, identity, and the protection of our world. Thank you.
We light this chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist tradition, to mark out this time together as special and worthy. If you have a chalice or a candle at home, We invite you to join us in lighting it and speaking these shared words as printed on your screen and in your order of service.
As we kindle this flame, we reignite our commitment to our congregational mission: to build community, seek inspiration, promote justice, and find peace.
Come, let us spend this time together.
I wanted to find something simple for all ages to try to describe the themes of this service today. And I came across a very short video by the AFL-CIO of Pennsylvania that does a pretty nice job of explaining this. It may be a little rah-rah, but it does explain why unions matter for inequality, and I think it's pretty on the mark. Afterwards, we'll have an opportunity to sing. I hope you'll join along. A hymn from our hymnal that is based on words from the 19th century mining union rulebook that were set to music by Pete Seeger.
The Pennsylvania AFL-CIO presents A Brief History of Unions. A long time ago, when our great country was just being built, there were the haves
Money, money, money.
and the have-nots. The haves owned companies and industries, and they relied on their workers to, well, do the hard work. The workers were proud of what they did. They worked hard every day. But they watched the companies and the haves get richer and richer while they got poorer or stayed the same. They had to work for as long as their bosses told them to work. They didn't get overtime pay, they didn't get to take a break, and there was no guarantee they would be safe at work. If they got hurt or even killed, the company didn't have to do anything about it.
This isn't fair!
The workers decided to do something about it. But it was hard. The companies could just fire them.
Get lost.
So the workers joined in unity.
Oh,
Together, they had a voice. Together, they could demand things like fair wage, safe working conditions, an end to child labor, sick leave, family leave, pensions. Together, labor unions created something in between the haves and the have-nots, the middle class. The middle class is very important. It allows people to make better lives for themselves. And the middle class has money to spend, and when they buy things, that money goes back into our economy, and it makes America strong.
woo!
Step by step, the longest march can be won, can be won. Many stones can form an arch, singly none, singly none. And by union what we will can be accomplished still. Drops of water turn a mill, singly none, singly none.
As Unitarian Universalists, we recognize and affirm that we are part of the interconnected web of life. And in that spirit, each Sunday we lift up ways that we are connected to each other, to the wider community, and to the world. One thing I wanted to remind you all about is that there are many events and ways to connect here at UUCUC other than on Sunday morning. And the way to know about those is through our e-news, which comes out each Thursday. So please take a look at it, especially as the spring is coming on. There are more and more events appearing. There are a couple of wonderful ones in the next week. On Wednesday, there is a class, a panel on nurturing resilience in children, youth, and emerging adults. Should be great for families and teachers. And then next Saturday, there's a yarn bombing event on our fence along Green Street that all are welcome to come to. So you can find out about those events and others by taking a look at your e-news. I'd like to share today, in the spirit of lifting up our connections with the larger community, a letter from Danielle Chenoweth, who is the township supervisor of Cunningham Township, about our UU Utility Fund and what a difference it has made in the lives of people in our community. And this is pretty directly related to the topic of this service. So she wrote, I'm just going to read the letter and her stories. Dear Florence, board members, and the congregation of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Urbana-Champaign, we thank you profusely for the support you have provided to the residents of Champaign County through the UU Utilities Fund. Your donations have been literally life-saving for residents in the county facing the devastations of current or imminent utility shutoffs in the winter during a pandemic. It has also helped us pay past due bills of homeless residents moving into permanent housing. May no one ever experience what these friends and neighbors of ours have. So far, and this was early March, and we actually sent in another check for several $1,000s in March. So far, your donations have allowed us to pay the past due bills and reconnection fees for 11 households, 4 for power and 7 for water. We were working with a man who had been homeless since his eviction several years ago to access new vouchers for the homeless. The entire process was a grueling 8 months during which he lost his job, moved from a motel into the shelter, and enrolled in school. He tried for months to get a copy of his out-of-town birth certificate with offices closed due to COVID. Finally, he did, submitted it, and received a voucher. Hooray! He then had to search for several months for housing and face discrimination as someone with a felony conviction. He finally found housing. But as he was going through the inspection process, he found out that he had over $300 in past due utility bills from years ago. He could not move in until he paid those off. And if he did not pay it soon, he would lose his apartments and voucher. The UUU fund was used to pay off this debt so that he could reestablish power in his name and move in. Through our housewarming program funded by the Angel Donor Fund, he was able to furnish his new apartment. I cannot express the joy of this man moving into his new place. May everyone experience such joy. Nearly every call we receive about water shutoffs is from a family with children or a resident with disabilities. One woman with 3 children called on a freezing day. She had made a payment plan but missed one payment of $98 when she lost expected child support and her water was cut off. Another woman with disabilities had her water turned off and the company refused partial payments, as is their policy when water is shut off. Another woman with a teenager had her water turned off when she lost her job due to COVID and said she had no notice as the notice went to her landlord. In every case, their water was paid from the UUU fund the same day they presented their bill to us. Being able to provide same-day assistance to those who are struggling to pay their utilities bills is invaluable, especially during the ongoing pandemic. Your generosity and kindness have helped keep members of our community safe in their homes, and we cannot thank you enough for your continued support for our community. This will be essential in the coming month as Ameren plans to reinstate disconnections at the end of March. The water company has continued shutoffs all winter. We expect a rise in requests for assistance going into April and May. We also want to thank you for all the wonderful notes from your congregation. It has been a rough winter for our participants and the staff who support them. It really lifted our spirits to hear from you. With love, Danielle Chenoweth. So I'll be talking about how we can make a difference, but we've made differences for people in our own community this winter, and I thank you for all of those ways. And now, Madeline Lofrano has a special announcement for us.
Hello, I'm Madeline Lofrano. I'm pleased to be here to bring you the 2021 edition of Some Auction News. I'm filling in for Chris Hanauer, who hasn't been seen since last week when he apparently grabbed on to a flying church and was carried away. If you see Chris or the flying church, please contact your local authorities immediately. Tonight we are talking about the upcoming 2021 service auction, which will be happening online the evenings of April 9th and 10th. I am pleased to have with me the co-chairs of this year's event, Katie Madigan and Jared Lafrano. Katie and Jared, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Jared, tell us about the service auction. What is it and why is it so important?
The service auction is one of the church's biggest fundraisers. Last year we raised $23,000 for the church in just 2 evenings. The service auction works like any other auction. Items go to the highest bidders. Now, in pre-pandemic times, we had a live auctioneer, the great Don Denny, but this is going to be online again this year, just like last year, so it works like a eBay auction.
Auctions are exciting, but they are pretty stressful, especially if the things you want get to be very expensive.
That's true, Madeline, but we have a lot of items at different prices. We even have quite a few items that will be for sale at a fixed price.
And what kind of things can people get from this year's auction?
So this year we have some of the perennial favorites, such as rhubarb custard pie, Ursula's famous bread, and of course pumpkin palooza. But we have some new items to offer this year, like a bonfire at Kaufman Lake or a Zoom acrylic painting class.
Katie, the theme of this year's auction, Up for the Challenge. Tell us why you went with that theme.
It's been a really hard year, Madeline. A year ago, we thought we'd be able to have a live auction again this year, but it's clear that there was going to be a challenge. So we almost didn't have it last year, but the church did come through and made it a big success, and we're hoping we can do it again this year.
Well, if I know this church, and since I've been in it my whole life, I think I do, I'm sure folks will come through for you. What do you need to make it a success?
Thanks for asking, Madeline. What we need right now are donations. We only have 2 weeks until the auction, so time is running out to be able to make donations that will make an impact. We need to have everything in by April 5th.
What kind of things make good donations?
Anything that you like to do and are willing to share with others, Madeline. Some people offer their gardening skills, maybe a dinner party, or a special craft that they can make.
And how can people get these donation ideas to you?
You can visit the auction website at uucuc.org/auction and click the link for donations. Or you can email the auction committee. The email address is auction@uucuc.org.
Well, it surely sounds like a wonderful event, and I'm sure the church will prove once again that it is up for the challenge. But now I'd like to address a more serious issue, Katie and Jared. What do you say about my miserable allowance?
I think a young lady who can address her parents by their first names can go get a job.
Yes, I'm afraid that's all the time we have, but thank you for coming to Some Auction News. I'm Madeline Lafrano. Have a good night.
Thank you, Madeline. And remember, you too could choose a topic for a sermon for next year and challenge your minister. You can also have an opportunity to bid on a 4-night stay at my retreat cottage out on the Washington coast. So there will be many wonderful ways to participate in the auction. So hope you have a chance to connect with it. Each Sunday, we share half of our Sunday offering with an organization in alignment with our values. And this month, we are supporting the UC Books to Prisoners program, which we have been very engaged with for a number of years. So it's great to be doing this as part of our shared offering. It's a local project providing books to incarcerated individuals in Illinois at no cost. And the song that you're about to hear, our offertory this morning, is by my friend and activist, balladeer Dana Lyons. The story of a worker, like so many, whose health is not protected by the company that he has worked for all his life.
You head home and take care of your mom. You know I hate to see her cry and causing a commotion. While you're there, give the company a call. The least that they can do is give my boy a small promotion. I don't know how I got to feel like this. I guess it's all the stuff that I've been breathing through these years. I've been so strong and healthy all my life. I never thought a little bit of dust was gonna kill me. The company's been good to me. I can't believe they didn't tell me all that they knew. The company wouldn't lie to me, but now that I can't work, I don't know what I'm gonna do for you. 2 hours later, my daddy was dead. The company's been good to us, was all my mama said.
When I was 18 years old, I spent several months living with the Community for Creative Nonviolence in Washington, D.C. I had never spent time in D.C. before. This multiracial, multi-generational community was in a row house in a part of D.C. that had not yet recovered 14 years later from the riots that had happened in Washington after the assassination of Martin Luther King. And in these Black neighborhoods, there were virtually no rebuilding efforts. The work of the community, CCNV, was radical street activism for the homeless of the city. It was, to put it mildly, a giant wake-up call for a teenager from Indiana. I realized very quickly that Washington, D.C. is really weird, really yucky weird. It was the first time in my life that I saw men in suits nonchalantly walking sometimes over the sleeping bodies of homeless people on the marble steps of the neoclassical buildings where they worked or lobbied, and where on those same steps in the wintertime, some of those folks would freeze to death. It was the first time that I realized that our capital city is a southern city, really to the core, with racial segregation at its heart, where some of the most powerful people in the world and some of the poorest people in America live nearly side by side, and where the citizens of DC, many of them Black, have had no representation, no voting representation in the Congress that sits in the middle of their city. And I realized that Washington, D.C. is a microcosm of America itself, that these stark realities, so clear there, are everywhere. That was in the 1980s. Since then, the great chasm has widened and widened. I think we all know this instinctively. We read it in the newspapers and in magazines, but understanding its full horror and its full impact on everyone takes a little more work. Here are some facts. You can look them up yourself. They're widely available. Since 1980, the share of the American economy in the top 1% of people has risen by 400%. CEOs of big companies now make 350 times more than their average worker. The top 1% of US households, and if your household makes $100,000 or a year or more, you are in the top 20%. But the top 1% of households control 40% of the nation's wealth, and that top 20%, anyone who makes over 100,000, controls 84% of the wealth in this country. And because it is so easy for numbers and percentages to just be sort of mind-numbing, and your eyes tend to glaze over, I'm going to try to put it in another way, and I have a prop here. So, this is an apple. Imagine that there are 100 people in this sanctuary. I look forward to that day. And we have 100 apples here. Out of those 100 people, there's one person, let's say they're sitting right over there, and not through any great genius on their part, who knows the circumstances, but they are able to amass 40 of these apples. All of them, almost half, all go to one person. And then in the next couple of pews, there's another 19 people or so there. So those people get 44 apples, which comes to about 2 apples a person. That probably feels kind of fair to them. Those are that little group in America that are making $100,000 a year or more. And everyone else, all throughout the sanctuary, 80 people, need to show you, kind of, again, it helps to have a visual representation here. Okay, so here's this one apple. So we'll cut it in half, and then we'll cut it in that piece in half again, so we're in quarters. And we'll cut off a little more than that because it's actually about 1/5 of the apple. So this is what everybody else gets. That's America. That's America in 2021. And it's not just, of course, in America, it's around the world. So the 26 richest people on Earth in 2018 had the same net worth as the total of the poorest half of the world's population. And in 2018, that was 3.8 billion people. So 3.8 billion here on one side, 26 on the other side. Same net worth. If you have a net worth, which I'm sure there are many people in this congregation with good investments and maybe owning a house or two, if your net worth is more than $1 million, you are in the global 1%. And that group controls 45% of the world's wealth. We have come to take this for granted. And though we are still the richest country on the planet, every year this inequality widens in the United States. For almost every measure of economic inequality, we rank well below most of the other developed countries in the world. In a recent speech, President Biden said 1 in 7 households in America now report that they don't have enough food. In Urbana last year, 70% of students in our schools received free or reduced lunches. And that's only economic inequality. The pervasive and toxic legacy of racism feeds inequality in the United States in so many areas. Education, healthcare, housing, insurance, each one of those could be a sermon. And we have seen this so vividly and seen its effects so vividly during this year of pandemic. In Michigan, 41% of the early coronavirus deaths were in the Black community, even though they make up 14% of the population of the state. But then the state made a determined effort to address that inequity by bringing testing to Black neighborhoods and ensuring equal access to support programs. And Black residents in Michigan are now underrepresented in COVID fatalities. This is not inevitable. The poverty rate among African Americans was 20.8% in 2018, higher than for any other racial or ethnic group in the United States, and more than twice the poverty rate of white Americans. That is the legacy that we live with. And growing up in poverty is also associated with toxic stress, and this impact can reach crisis levels when a person is grappling with the toxic stress of poverty as well as the toxic stresses of racism. 42% of kids born in poverty will never get out. That's America today. And inequality feeds on itself. In a way, it's a kind of cancer. The progressive economist Robert Reich wrote in 2013, this is very prescient, the connection between widening inequality and the undermining of democracy has long been understood. And he goes on to say, as former Supreme Court Justice Louise Brandeis is famously alleged to have said in the early years of the last century, an era when robber barons dumped sacks of money on legislators' desks, now they just wire it, we may have a democracy or we may have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we cannot have both. As income and wealth flow upward, political power follows inevitably. And with all that political power comes laws and policies that benefit the richest, and so they get richer. Right now, we're approaching levels of inequality that have not been seen since the Gilded Age of the late 19th and early 20th century, before unions and various laws that prohibited monopolies and the oppression of workers. There are so many horrific consequences from rising inequality, consequences that translate into real suffering for the poor and losses for all of us. Political polarization increases. The middle class grows smaller and weaker. Debt increases, hunger increases, and access to education decreases. People in poverty end up in endless loops of catch-22s. That letter that I read from Danielle Chenoweth describes it so well. You know, if your power is turned off, how are your kids going to be able to succeed in school without internet access? It goes on and on. For instance, the right to work laws that began to be passed in the 80s and 90s cut off benefits for the very poorest families. By the mid-2000s, 1 in 5 single mothers were neither working nor receiving any welfare benefits. They were dependent on food stamps. and living essentially cashless in the richest nation on earth. Many of us are deeply concerned about the climate. Our globe's richest 10%, the richest 500 million adults, some people in this congregation may be in that category, bear responsibility for about 50%, 50, of all global carbon emissions. Surely this isn't the world we want. And yet it is happening all around us and to us. I think sometimes we who consider ourselves middle class are asleep to this. And we really must wake up for the sake of the planet, for the sake of democracy, and especially for the sake of all who are suffering. As Nicholas Kristof wrote recently, some 12 million children live in households that lack enough food. I would hope that if any of us came across a single hungry child, we would pause and immediately offer help. Of course we would. But collectively, we stroll by 12 million desperate children without stopping. And our own UU second principle, which we don't talk about as much as we do the first and the seventh, reminds us of our commitments to justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Inequality is not only an economic or social problem, but is quite deeply a moral and spiritual one. So what can we do? I realize I may have depressed you this morning, but sometimes we need to look at the truth to wake up. It is so easy to feel helpless in the face of this ever-increasing spiral of inequality. And I want to suggest, though, that there are ways that we are less helpless than we think. Way, way less helpless. And there are 3 things I can do starting right now. And I have prompts. Oops, sorry. Okay, here we go. Here's my first prop. Okay. There are 3 things. The first is unions. Support unions and minimum wage changes. Until I worked on this sermon, I had not realized how true the economic connection is and has been historically between the power of the unions, the size of the number of workers in unions, and the middle class, the size of the middle class in America. Though it makes sense if you think about it for just a little while. The rich and the corporations have the political power and the power to ignore requests for change until people come together. And when people come together in unions, they can change things dramatically for the better. One of my favorite bumper stickers read, "Love weekends? Thank your labor unions." There was a time, a few generations ago, when weekends for workers, safety for workers, didn't even exist. When hundreds of thousands of children worked long hours in factories and it wasn't considered a problem. Unions changed that, and people endured violence and even death for the rights that we take for granted now. That's why some interests have taken such direct aim at unions very effectively. State after state have passed legislation limiting unions, starting in the South, back to our racial legacy, to prevent organizing of Black textile workers. In the 1950s, a time of the lowest inequality in the 20th century, a third of all workers belong to a union. By 2019, essentially now, only about 10% of Americans belong to a union. So, if there is a union for the work that you do, please support them. And even if not, there are ways to support union organizing. Right now, you may have seen this in the news, Amazon warehouse workers in Birmingham, Alabama, are trying to organize. And the push for a fair minimum wage would take us so far in the direction we need to go. It's estimated that raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour would increase the standard of living for 17 million Americans. Excuse me, my prop fell. Okay, here we go. Prop number 2. Support taxes. What? You say taxes? This may seem obvious to some and problematic to others. Everyone I know dislikes paying taxes. We roll our eyes when April 15th comes around. We complain about our property taxes, especially in Urbana. Some of us do whatever we can do, even stretching the truth a little bit, to pay as little as we can. And yet, taxes are powerful, powerful ways to redistribute wealth and create a more equitable society. If you look at the Scandinavian countries, which have some of the highest tax rates in the world, they also have some of the lowest rates of inequality and also highest measures of happiness in the world. They have incredibly high taxes on the upper middle class and wealthy, but medicine is free, higher education is free, and there is a true safety net. I can barely imagine what that would be like, what my life would be like if I didn't have to worry about maintaining health insurance or having my life change in some way where I fell through the many gaping cracks in our system. Is there a connection between happiness and the money in your pocket that perhaps you saved by however you worked out paying less taxes? Yes, to a degree. As income rises from zero to about $75,000 a year, there is, on average, an increase in happiness with those increases. Above $75,000, not so much. Not until you get to $8 million do you start to see any change in relative happiness as a result of having more money. So unless you are aiming to be a multimillionaire at $8 million, you might as well share your resources with those 1 in 7 families with not enough food. And again, the very best way to do that is through taxes. And of course, there is a dark side to taxes in the United States with our bloated military budget, and this is a huge problem. But state and local taxes don't go to the military. And even the small amount that our federal taxes are used to ameliorate poverty makes for a much, much better world for all. So, let's change our stories about taxes. Let's celebrate them as a way to creating a more equitable country. And finally, and maybe most importantly, voting rights. If it has ever become clear that voting and voting rights matter, it's been this year. Within weeks of the change in Congress and the administration, which, if you remember, was only possible because of tremendous, extraordinary get out the vote efforts, we saw the passage of a COVID relief bill that rivals, that we have not seen anything like in this country since the relief bills of the 1930s, as we were coming out of the Great Depression. The Center on Poverty and Social Policy at Columbia University has calculated that about 5.5 million children will be lifted out of poverty this year as a result of that bill, more than half of those currently within poverty. The injection of direct monthly cash support will have a stunning effect, especially on communities of color. And that was only possible because of the changes in representation in Washington, D.C. And of course, this is stunning, but only if it continues. Right now, that legislation is for 1 year only. That means that next November, we have to do what we did this November all over again. We have to continue or even intensify the fight for the rights of all to vote, state after state, especially in Georgia. I'm sure you've all been hearing about the attempts to limit voting in many states. We absolutely can't give up. It really, really matters. Maybe you're feeling a little tired right now. Really, you might be saying to yourself, does it have to be this hard? Yes, it is this hard, because the power on the side of the very rich is truly immense. But that power is not limitless. It is not endless. We have changed things in America before. In fact, at the end of the Gilded Age, when those robber barons were dropping money on legislators' desks, and we can do it again. We really can. So I hope I have given you a little bit of a sense of how we can respond. Now we have some very special music for you coming up. It's a piece of music about how calls for justice cannot be silenced, even with violence. It was written about Victor Jara, the great Chilean poet and musician who was murdered by the right-wing Pinochet regime in 1973 for his support of the rights of workers and the poor. Victor Jara, his memory continues and his ideas continue to be honored throughout South America. The song, called To Victor, reminds us that it is not possible to erase the singing once the air has whistled the tones of their song. You can read the full lyrics of this beautiful song in your order of service.
This
each Sunday, we bring our individual joys and sorrows with us to this space, this virtual space that we share together. And whatever you may be carrying this morning, let us help carry it with you. During the time of music coming up, you can allow this blessing song, which we sing as a congregation when we're together, to wash over you, or you can sing along. And then there's a time right afterwards where we share out loud your joys and sorrows, if you feel like sending in an email with whatever those may be, and I will read them aloud. From Kathleen Holden, David Prochaska is in the Meadowbrook Rehabilitation Unit after a short stay at Carl. He unexpectedly developed serious back issues 3 weeks ago. We're fortunate to have access to resources that will help him heal. This is also from another person about David Prochaska, from Jim Hannum. David Prochaska has been diagnosed with a compression fracture and stenosis and has been admitted to Meadowbrook for treatment. He has been in a lot of pain, and now Kathleen is unable to visit because a staff member tested positive for COVID. We hope David's recovery goes well and that his family can visit him soon. Yes. From Julie Loud. Please keep my best friend and sister of the heart, Malia, in your thoughts as she receives a stem cell transplant in Oregon this week. From Jerry Carden and Tim Temple. We ask for healing thoughts and prayers for friends Gretchen and Jeff as they both face significant health challenges that require them to live apart. Jeff is now in assisted living at Bickford Cottages. Gretchen is moving to Boston this week to live with her daughter. Also a candle of sorrow in memory of our friend and fellow UU, Olive Clark, who passed away in her sleep Tuesday night. Olive turned 100 last July, a life well lived. And as we do, I will light a candle here for Olive. And finally, some of you may have seen this. Last night or this morning, I sent out an email to the congregation. I have a life challenge that has arisen. I just received a diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis, which is a systemic autoimmune illness that particularly affects the joints, although it can affect other systems as well. And if you want to know more about it, there's a lot of information in that letter that went out. And also Sally and I will both be at the fellowship hour after this service, and you are welcome to come and ask questions, or Sally's got, I think, some questions in mind, including what we call sort of inappropriate questions, where I can say, oh, maybe I won't answer that one. But I want to assure you that I am doing well right now due to medication, but it is still a significant challenge. And actually, I didn't read, Sandy Hannum wrote, "We wish Reverend Florence well as she deals with her new health issue, sending healing thoughts and love and gentle reminders to not do too much." Thank you, Sandy and Jim. We'll now have a time of meditation, reflection, prayer, and opening our hearts to these and other joys and sorrows that may be in your own heart this morning. As we go forward into the rest of our Sunday, which seems to have changed in the time that I've been in this sanctuary from windy and stormy to sunny, I just want to remind you again that, yes, we can do this. And the hymn that we are closing the service with today is one called "We Are Building a New Way." And may it inspire you to truly know that we can continue our work for justice, equity, and compassion in human relations.
extinguish our chalice with these shared words written by Unitarian Universalist minister Reverend Elizabeth Selly Jones.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.